Ohio House Bill 454, also known as the Save Adolescents from Experimentation or SAFE Act, Families, Aging, and Human Services Committee. Second hearing, May 19, 2022. Testimony by Helena Kerschner, a woman who transitioned in childhood, now detransitioned. Proponent.
We'll now call on Helena Kerschner. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Helena Kerschner. I am here to represent myself today. I'm not representing any organizations, and my testimony is all my experience and my opinion. I am a 23-year-old detransitioned woman, and I identified as transgender for about 5 years throughout my adolescence and into young adulthood. In the last 10 or so years, there's been a drastic change in the demographics of people presenting with gender dysphoria. Previously, gender dysphoric individuals were overwhelmingly biologically male, either adults or prepubescent children. Today, the largest group of people identifying as transgender are adolescent girls. I was one of those girls, and I am here to support the SAFE Act because it would protect adolescents like I once was from having irreversible medical interventions before they have the chance to mature and understand themselves in a more complex way. It is a fact that the gender affirmative protocol for adolescents with gender dysphoria, which includes regimens of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries like double mastectomies, is irreversible and can lead to infertility, inability to experience sexual intimacy in the future, early onset osteoporosis, and other health conditions associated with hormonal imbalances such as mental health conditions, heart disease, and stroke. These are decisions with a very heavy weight, and I am here out of a grave concern for those teenage girls seeking these procedures, because I know, based on personal experience as a member of the trans community and the emerging testimonies of detransitioners like myself, that there are unique needs going completely unaddressed in this cohort, who tend to have histories of trauma and comorbid mental health issues that risk being greatly exacerbated by gender-affirming medical treatments. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and how I began to believe that I was trans and why I now am so thankful and feel so blessed to have not had early medical interventions. When I was a freshman in high school, I was going through a very dark time. I was struggling with severe depression, I had an eating disorder, I was self-harming, and I was very socially isolated. I began to use the internet as a way to escape and find other people like me. I was online all the time, and internet communities began to completely replace my school and community in my social life. On the social media sites I took part in, there was a strong emphasis, in fact, more like a requirement for social justice and gender identity ideology. I saw messages like, if you don't like your body, that's a sign that you're trans. If you don't fit in with girls, that's a sign that you're trans. If you feel bad and you don't know why, that's a sign that you could be trans. Once I started to question myself based on these messages, I saw additional messages saying that only trans people question their gender identity. So just the fact that you're unsure means that you're trans. These messages gave me hope. I remember feeling like there was finally an explanation for why I hated my body so much and why I couldn't fit in. I also saw advice to experiment with changing my name and pronouns just to see how it would feel. And when I did, I was met with more positivity than I had ever experienced. To a young girl with severe depression and loneliness, I mistook this positivity as a sign that being trans really was right for me. And I became completely convinced that I needed to transition and that I would never, ever change my mind. I began spending more and more time in trans communities online, later offline, and in these communities, there was more encouragement to be transgender. I was told anything that causes me to question being trans is transphobic, conversion therapy, and to never look at anything that makes me doubt my gender. At school, my guidance counselor and school psychologist completely affirmed my desire to transition. My guidance counselor even helped me plan various options for how to get hormones and surgeries, without telling my parents at this point. They even told my mom at a later point that if she did not affirm me as her son and allow me to begin testosterone therapy, that I might kill myself. They saw nothing off about the girl known for cutting and depression, becoming obsessed with the idea of adopting a new identity and changing her body. Fortunately, my parents did not give in, no matter how many people told them that I was a boy, and I was only able to start testosterone once I turned 18. Many adolescents today are not that lucky and are given these experimental medical interventions as adolescents. Soon after my 18th birthday, I was prescribed testosterone in a single 1-hour appointment at a Planned Parenthood. I was asked only a handful of superficial questions, including one in which I described being suicidal and believing that testosterone was going to be the solution to these feelings. I was then prescribed 100 milligrams of testosterone to be injected per week, 4 times the typical starting dose, because I told the clinician that I believed I had extra estrogen due to the size of my thighs and I needed extra testosterone to remedy this. And I have medical records of all this, by the way. Despite being a legal adult by the time I started testosterone, the treatment still had a severely negative effect on me. Fortunately, I was not on it long enough to suffer long-term physical health effects like some of my detransitioned friends unfortunately do, but the psychological effects of the hormonal instability caused by this treatment required hospitalizations 2 times and resulted in the darkest years of my life. I was in serious danger, and none of the medical professionals that I saw ever suggested that this high dose of testosterone I was on could be a factor in these new severe symptoms. When I stopped taking the testosterone, my strange symptoms disappeared. Despite all of this suffering, it could have all been exponentially worse had I undergone these treatments at an even younger age. The reason my suffering was limited to psychological effects is because my brain was able to mature and think more deeply before spending too long on the testosterone or electing to have surgeries. I truly believe that if I had taken those extra steps, I would not be the person I am today. And it really pains me, again, to see what my friends who actually did have those steps and regret them are going through. And contrary to what Representative Smith said, it's not a small and insignificant group. These are people that actually matter. And if you're going to purport to care about minorities, you should care about this minority too. I was convinced that I was transgender for 5 years. I wore men's clothes, I used the men's restroom, I legally changed my name to a male name, and I injected testosterone into my own thigh on a weekly basis. I was one of those trans youth activists claim to support. But since I was harmed by gender medicine, I am now reduced to just a bigot. My mental health no longer matters to these people who purport to care so much because I no longer identify as trans. But the truth is, I don't hate anybody. I just know that there are young people like me out there who, despite their convictions that body modification will save their lives, deserve a chance to be seen as whole, complex people and actually grow up, grow into themselves, and be guided to appreciate their healthy bodies and all the blessings that a healthy body will give. That is what true compassion is. Seeing any young person who calls themselves as trans and just another trans person who needs to be put on the gender transition conveyor belt is not compassion. In closing, I ask members of the committee to think back to a time when you were an adolescent. Did you have a conviction, a belief, or maybe a relationship that you believed was of urgent importance and would last forever? What if there was a way to concretize that, to permanently change your body, possibly leaving you infertile or missing organs or incapable of experiencing intimacy with a partner? What if adults around you encouraged your conviction and encouraged you to make a permanent, irreversible decision based on it? That is what is being done to thousands of children and adolescents today, all based on the sociological theory of gender identity that has not been proved in any scientific capacity. I know this is a politically heated issue, but I just ask the committee to put all that aside and get in touch with the human aspect. Humans are more complicated than this story about gender identity and transitioning is letting on. You know a child or a teenager cannot consent to lifelong consequences, regardless of what they say or what the adults around them or involved in activism say. Do the right thing, even if it's unpopular, and protect the young and vulnerable with your vote in favor of Bill 454. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your story with us today. Representative Edwards?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Is it Helena or Helena?
Helena.
Helena. Thank you very much. I don't care whether, you're a doctor, pediatrician, Ohio resident, or the Southern Poverty Law Center has said about you. And regardless of what some people on this, the actions and the words of people on this committee today, your testimony, your life story, what you've been through, your opinion matters, and it matters here in this chamber, and it matters everywhere. You're not small and insignificant. Your life matters, and I only wish when I was 23 years of age I had an ounce of the courage that you've showed here today to be 23 and to come testify. I would have been a nervous wreck, so I want to commend you for that. At what age were you when you very first remembered someone in the medical community or even in your family offering mental health support to you with some of the issues that were displayed? And at what age were you when people started to notice some of the things that may have been happening behind closed doors of the battle that you suffered with mental health?
So I started having mental health issues pretty early on. Around the time I was 7, I experienced a serious loss in my family, and that just kind of triggered just like a lifelong story of just depression and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, what was the second part of your question?
At what age do you remember very first coming into access or someone talking to you about possibly seeing someone about your mental health issues?
So I started seeing a therapist in middle school. I didn't really find her, I didn't click with her though, so I think I just kind of stopped going at some point. And then I didn't receive very much mental health care until later.
Follow-up?
So you talk about going to college, or I read some of your testimony you may not have read, but you talk about going to college when you began some of this. Was mental health a prerequisite for some of those, some of the transitioning that you began having at that time?
No, like I said, my acquisition of testosterone, it didn't require any kind of like intensive screening or relationship with a mental health provider. It was just a kind of very superficial back and forth, lasted at most 20 minutes. And I also have all the records of that shows my answers and the questions. And yeah, so there wasn't really any kind of in-depth process for that.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Chairman.
Representative Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair to the witness, thank you for coming today. I want to let you know I don't think that anyone's personal experience is insignificant. So I'm sorry if it sounded like by quoting data that showed a small population size that it may have come across as me saying that was insignificant. That was not my intention. And I want to...
I'd also like to push back on
Could I
that
ask
because...
my question?
Let's just take a pause, please, and remember to direct everything through the chair for
Okay,
both members and witnesses. It's okay. Take a pause. Go ahead and answer, and then you had a question, I believe, to follow up.
I just feel like I need to clarify because the data that we have that purports to show a very small percentage of people detransitioning, a lot of these studies are not good. I know one that is often cited it's actually a survey of people who are currently enrolled in a gender clinic. And from my personal experience, knowing so many detransitioners, a lot of us, once we stop identifying as trans, we just stop going to the gender clinic and we find other providers who are not so involved in the kind of like gender industry. So there's a study like that, and people are always using that to say that it's such a small, insignificant, rare number. And there's another one that I think it's just surveying people who currently identify as transgender and asking them if they have ceased medical transition in the past, and a small percentage of those people said that they had. So I don't think that those studies are a good reflection of what is actually going on. We actually have a severe lack of data on overall detransition numbers, and I don't think it's anywhere near as small as some people like to portray.
Representative Smith?
Through the chair to the witness. Thank you for that. That's something we can all research more. The data that I was quoting was coming from our Legislative Service Commission analysis, and it was talking about not detransitioning, a lot of syllables in that, right? But it was talking about, it was referring to tiny percentage of the American population who experiences distress at identifying with their quote unquote, with their biological sex. I'm quoting the whole thing from LSC. So that's all I was just saying. And so, and we have invested a good amount of time here today, many hours. And part of the reason I cite that is because the calls that I hear coming to my office for healthcare needs that people are very, very desperate for revolve around having home care for the disabled, having basic dentistry care for children who are in school who might not even be able to learn because they have a toothache. We have just so many healthcare problems that I know that affect such a huge group of Ohioans. And so I'm just trying to understand, what motivates us to be here today, spending hours and hours and really hundreds of thousands of dollars of staff time to address an issue that, is, I'm not sure that number one issue in our healthcare system. And so what I want to ask you is about your mental health care experience. So you suffered from very significant and legitimate health care issues, which I keep saying that I do care about. And so I just wanted to understand whether you had any access to counseling beyond the one appointment that you talked about, I believe at a clinic. Did you have other access to health care, counselors, psychologists?
I had that psychologist that I saw middle school and kind of like very early high school, and then I had my school guidance counselor and my school psychologist who were both affirming and did not really explore my mental health issues beyond just saying, yes, you're a boy and your parents are transphobic.
May I have a follow-up?
Follow-up?
And so in that experience, what helped me understand also, and I don't have a predetermined place as far as where I'm going with this, but I really want to understand. So what was the interaction that they had with your parents, if any?
Yeah, so there was only one major interaction. It was my school psychologist suggested that my mother come in and we have a family session to help her understand that I was trans and that I needed to transition, and that did not go over very well. I think my mom felt very attacked and she left the session early. And I remember just feeling like, oh, finally adults are paying attention and they're actually like calling attention to my mental health issues to my parents. And so, yeah, that's the only real interaction they had with my parents.
Are there any additional questions for the witness? Representative Click?
Well, thank you, Helena. I think you're a rock star. I appreciate your testimony today. And since we're on the topic, through the chair, of your school guidance counselor, that was like the third question down, or maybe the 10th question down. Just teasing, Chair.
Still have two more witnesses, Representative Click.
Did you, first of all, that was the weirdest apology I ever heard. We're not saying you're insignificant, but you're insignificant. That's how I read that, but that's beside the point. Your school guidance counselor, after speaking to your mother loves you and supported you, but was not supportive of this gender ideology. Did the school counselor come between you and your mother and persist in pushing you down this path, even though your mother did not approve?
Yeah, my school psychologist and my school counselor both maintained that my mother was in the wrong and that she was operating out of a place of transphobia, and that the best thing for me to do would be to find a gender clinic.
Follow up?
Yes, so thank you, Chair. That's incredible that they would do that. And I have noticed through some other material that was provided, because I think you ended up getting your testosterone from a Planned Parenthood. Mm-hmm. And I noticed now there is actually a Planned Parenthood that offers gender therapy and hormones and so forth right in Cincinnati. And did you know about that?
Do I know about that now? Yes, I do.
Okay.
Follow up?
So I think one of the important things, and you and I have conversed before we had coffee together, and I certainly appreciate that time. I learned so much from you and from your personal experience. But my takeaway, correct me if I'm wrong, my takeaway was that, you were cutting, so you're doing self-harm, and they were like, oh, there's the cutter, and you told them you were depressed, and they yawned, basically, and you talked about other things, but it wasn't until you said you were trans, they said, let's get that boy some testosterone. Is that a correct reflection on what you told me?
That's pretty much what happened. And I think that's why so many young people with mental health issues are getting caught up in it and, you know, starting to believe that they're trans, because when you're cutting or you're depressed or you have an eating disorder or something, at least my experience at school was, it was mostly kind of like, oh, your academic performance is falling. Why is that happening? And then I say, oh, I'm depressed. And they say, well, start a journal or something like that. But then when I say that I'm trans, then it's like everybody's all hands on deck. We need to help this person. We know exactly what to do. You're in good hands. Like there's this feeling of like, oh, I'm finally getting noticed and I'm finally getting helped. And all I have to do is interpret myself in this one particular way, and then people actually care about me. Of course, they don't care once you stop identifying as trans, but.
Follow up.
Yes. So you also mentioned, both in our private conversation and today, the effect of social media. And I'm on a couple other committees and bills. And I know we just had conversations in another committee about mental health training for having to do with those involved in sports because of the pressure sometimes that the athletes face on social media. I'm a joint sponsor on a bill for eating disorders, and they have a high suicide rate as well. And so we want to, create some awareness to that. But we also notice that in both of those areas, social media today is just it's something I didn't face in my generation. When I was growing up, I had a black and white TV with an antenna, and sometimes we have to put tinfoil on it and stand with our tongue out just to get a signal. So things have changed a lot since I was a kid. But your generation is inundated with social media, and I know that you're in contact. I'd like to hear some on this too, about how many detransitioners reach out to you, because you are out there and very public with this. And what do you see the role of social media playing on the health of young people when it comes to this gender ideology and how it influences them in a negative way?
I mean, there's so many factors to that. There's no way to really cleanly answer it, but I will say that the social media component does seem to be a common denominator, and that there's a lot of detransitioners and desisters, people who identified as trans without taking medical steps and then stopped identifying as trans, who pretty much all universally say that the social media communities and the social media influencers were just a very big motivating factor in them coming to these conclusions about themselves being trans.
Follow up.
And so thank you so much, Chair, through the Chair, to Helena. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to come here. As I'm looking at this, and people use this word authentic. I want to be my authentic self. Do you feel like, and at that time, I'm sure you felt that was authentic, but now that you have the time to look back, you're 23 years old, they say the frontal lobe of the brain, which is risk management and assessment, solidifies at about the age of 24. And so as you've gotten older and matured more, you've been able to look at these things. And what would you say was your authentic self? Was it what you were going through earlier, or is it what you are now?
Well, I think that we come to know our authentic selves by the progression of our lives. So everything that we experience and everything that happens to us, it all adds up on top to form who we are. And I do take issue with this idea that it's like, oh, your authentic self, it exists somewhere outside of all that, and you need to create it by getting hormones and surgeries. That's, I think, just such a false way to look at life. And I think it's really dangerous to tell young people that before, like I said, they've had the ability to really have more life experiences, have some wins, take some losses, become who they are. And it's just only I think, I only really believed that being trans was authentic to me when I was younger because I was so inexperienced. But now that I have more experiences, it seems like a really dangerous thing to tell young people.
Representative Liston.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you for sharing your story, and I'm sure that everyone on this committee and in this room would agree that we are sorry that you did not receive better support and mental health services while you're going through such difficult times, and I certainly feel that as well. One of the things that I I'm hearing, and I just want to clarify because it feels a little maybe not my perception. What I'm hearing is that your experience was that trans individuals or those who come out as trans are treated better because of that overall trans youth get additional support and treatment that and generally are treated better in society than those that are not. And I struggle with that and just wanted to bring it up.
In certain ways and in some environments, yes. I think anybody who's gender nonconforming is going to face prejudice, is going to face bullying. And I think, like people have stated previously here, I think that's actually one of the main reasons why some people cling on to this idea of being trans, because they have been bullied for being gender nonconforming. So I definitely think that there's absolutely marginalization and prejudice that takes place in that capacity. But there's also a certain section of the medical industry and the mental health field that does place a kind of certainty upon the idea of gender identity and the next step to take for a person with a gender identity that is trans, being transition. There's a level of certainty with that where people can be led to believe that, oh, okay, this actually is going to save me. I'm actually in good hands. These people are taking care of me. And that is, what I'm saying is it's a very real thing that's happening. It doesn't negate the other areas of society where these people might suffer and be excluded and marginalized. But that kind of treatment is very seductive to somebody who's desperate and searching for a solution. And it might not be true.
Follow up?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you for that. So then with that in mind, I think a lot of the discussion and maybe confusion often comes with looking at the reality of practices in sort of some of the gender affirming clinics in the state. And again, I can speak to just experience talking with providers in terms of the thoroughness of support that is offered currently in our state, which is, at least locally, pretty extensive, that individuals come in and are, go through a pretty rigorous evaluation and have multiple support services prior to really getting to this point of transition. And so I guess I would love to hear what your experience was. Were you given additional support services like we all, I think, would agree should occur? So.
I really was not. My experience was rather negligent. I mean, I just went to that one appointment. I got the prescription. I got to pick my own crazy high dose, 4 times that of the normal recommendation. And then they just sent me on my way. And I think I had one follow-up phone call and I never saw them again. There's no follow-up.
Quick follow-up?
And was an adult clinic or one of the pediatric clinics?
That was adult.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Are there any additional questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate it.